I thought the most valuable thing in my living room was the marriage it celebrated. A painting, rare and luminous, hung above the mantel, a gift from a collector who said it belonged with someone who understood legacy. Last week, it vanished. My husband swore he hadn't touched it. My mother-in-law smiled too quickly when I asked. 2 days later, scrolling through an online marketplace, I found it, listed under her store, marked sold. The buyer's name hit me harder than the betrayal, an old rival who'd once promised to ruin me. That was when I decided this wouldn't end with a refund. The air inside Margaret's house smelled faintly of lilies and cinnamon, a carefully engineered perfume that made the evening feel warmer than it was. Guests mingled in the living room, their laughter swelling and dipping with the notes of a string quartet playing in the corner. Margaret had insisted on hosting our anniversary celebration this year, saying it would be more intimate than a restaurant. It was intimate, yes, but in the way of porcelain teacups, meant to be admired, not used. Above the fireplace hung the painting. Golden light rippled across its surface, like it was alive. The same light that had first caught my breath 2 years ago when the collector had pressed it into my hands. "You'll know what to do with it," he'd said, his eyes fixed on mine as if the responsibility were a crown. I had chosen that mantle carefully, knowing it would be the one place everyone would see, the silent proof that I belonged here. Daniel stood beside me, arm at my waist, chatting with his cousins. I half listened, half watched the way guests' eyes drifted to the painting, then back to me, their smiles a little tighter. It was only when I stepped closer to adjust the champagne flutes on the mantel that I saw it, a small scratch along the lower corner of the frame, no longer than a paperclip. My stomach dipped. That frame had been flawless, each corner sealed like a vault. I turned to call Daniel over, but a guest beat me to the thought. "Is that still here?" he said casually, sipping his wine. I could swear I saw it online last week. My breath caught, the words pressing against my ribs. "Online?" I asked, managing a polite tilt of my head. He shrugged. "One of those estate sale sites, I think. Looked just like it." His wife laughed it off, but I saw the flicker in her eyes, a shared recognition that there was something to the idea. The rest of the evening I moved through the crowd with mechanical grace, smiling at toasts, laughing when required. Margaret was in her element, flitting from group to group, topping glasses and collecting compliments on the food. Every now and then, her gaze would brush mine, quick and unreadable, like a cat checking if you'd noticed the broken vase yet. By the time Daniel and I were home, he was too tired to notice my silence. I waited until the shower ran before pulling my laptop into bed. It didn't take long. A few key phrases, artist's name, medium, frame style, and there it was, a listing on an online marketplace, the photos crisp and professional, my painting, unmistakable. The description danced around specifics, calling it a vintage original in excellent condition, and claiming it came from a private estate downsizing collection. The seller's name was a pseudonym, but the profile was impossible to mistake. I recognized the same floral arrangement Margaret kept in her hallway, visible in the background of another item for sale, a silver tea set I'd seen at her house last Christmas. My pulse quickened. I scrolled further down the page. Jewelry, china, even an antique clock, all with similar descriptions, all photographed against her distinct burgundy drapes. This wasn't a one-off sale, it was an operation. I clicked the sold tab and my chest tightened. The painting was gone. Sold. I opened the order details. Price, 5 times higher than what the family had estimated its worth. And then I saw the name. The buyer wasn't just anyone. It was Thomas Hale. Memories crashed into me. A boardroom, his smirk as he tried to undercut me in front of a potential investor, the whisper campaigns he'd started when I refused his proposal. He had once told me, "You'll regret crossing me." And now, my wedding gift, my proof of belonging in this family, was hanging in his house, or worse, in his collection as a trophy. I sat back, the glow of the screen bleaching the room in cold light. Margaret hadn't just sold something that wasn't hers. She'd sold it to the one person who would understand exactly how to use it against me. I closed the laptop slowly, a deliberate motion, as if sealing away the storm building in my chest. The celebration was over. The game had begun. The next morning, I made coffee the way Daniel liked, extra cream, no sugar, and carried it into his office. He was already on a video call laughing with one of his partners. I set the mug down, kissed his cheek, and smiled like nothing in the world was out of place. The painting wasn't mentioned. Not by him, not by me. That was exactly how I wanted it. For the rest of the week, I played the role of the oblivious daughter-in-law. I complimented Margaret on her choice of table linens, asked her advice on roasting lamb, even accompanied her to a weekend flea market. She chatted about her side business, the little shop she ran online, and I nodded as if it were charming rather than parasitic. Every now and then, I'd see a flicker of calculation in her eyes, measuring how far she could push without me noticing. At night, when the house was quiet, I dug deeper. The buyer's name, Thomas Hale, wasn't just a slap in the face. He was a walking warning label. Years ago, when I was managing a budding e-commerce platform, he'd approached me with a funding deal that looked like gold on the surface. I'd done my due diligence, found the rot underneath, fraudulent valuations, fake accounts, and turned him down. He'd taken it personally, the kind of man who believed no was a challenge, not an answer. Seeing his name tied to my painting told me two things. One, Margaret had no idea who she was dealing with, and two, if Thomas wanted to use that sale to hurt me, he could. I opened a blank spreadsheet and began logging every item in Margaret's shop. Descriptions, prices, timestamps. The patterns were obvious to someone who knew where to look. Photos taken in the same two corners of her home. Identical rugs. The same imperfect lighting that left a faint shadow of her on the wall. By the third night, the list was long enough to feel like a confession. And then came the part that made my stomach tighten. A set of crystal goblets from our wedding registry, a bronze clock my father had given us, and a limited edition decanter I'd wrapped myself and placed in our dining room cabinet. All sold, all without my knowledge. The past year rewound in my mind, moments clicking into place. A shelf I thought I'd reorganized, a drawer that seemed lighter. Margaret's casual mentions of helping a friend downsize or selling off storage. I'd been robbed in plain sight with a smile and Sunday dinner. I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof that couldn't be brushed aside as paranoia. That's when I called Elias, a cybersecurity consultant I'd worked with during my platform days. He didn't ask why, just told me to send the shop's public link. Within hours, he had the metadata from her uploaded photos, the IP addresses used for her logins, and, most tellingly, the payment processor IDs. It was a treasure map in digital form, every sale leading back to her. One by one, we followed the trail, and it became clear she wasn't just selling my belongings. She was running a well-oiled reselling scheme, moving goods quickly enough to avoid buyer complaints, using multiple shipping addresses to mask the volume. Then, Elias showed me something else. Two separate buyers had posted negative reviews on other forums, accusing her of selling inauthentic antiques. I reached out to both. The first was a retiree in Vermont who'd bought a Victorian tea set, only to find it was a modern reproduction. The second was a boutique owner in Denver, still fighting to get a refund for a French armoire that turned out to be from a chain furniture store. Both were eager to talk, especially once I confirmed their seller was the same Margaret they'd dealt with. They'd kept receipts, email chains, even photos comparing what they'd received to the listings. I offered to connect them with my lawyer if it came to that. Still, a part of me hesitated. Margaret was Daniel's mother. Whatever else she was, blowing this open would scorch the earth between us. I'd built my career on strategic moves, not emotional outbursts, and I knew better than to light a match I couldn't control. But then, Elias sent one last file. "Thought you'd want to see this," his message read. It was a PDF of a bank statement, not hers, ours, our joint account. In between the deposits from our paychecks was a series of incoming transfers, each one matching the amounts from her recent sales. The description line read, "Household reimbursement." I stared at the numbers until they blurred. She wasn't just selling my things. She was funneling the money through our account, laundering it clean before moving it elsewhere, which meant if anyone started asking questions, the trail wouldn't stop at her door. It would stop at mine. The coffee in my mug had gone cold by the time I set it down. The role of the oblivious daughter-in-law had served its purpose. Now it was time to be who I really was. The following week, Margaret's little empire began to shimmer in public. She launched a page on the shop titled Giving Back, complete with photos of her handing checks to local charities. The captions told a story. She was downsizing friends' estates, selling their heirlooms, and donating a generous portion of the proceeds to community causes. It was polished, believable, and it infuriated me. I recognized the timing immediately. The sale of my painting had gone through just days before Daniel and I had filed our business loan application. With that asset conveniently missing from our household inventory, our net collateral looked thinner. I could imagine her reasoning. The bank would be less inclined to approve a larger loan, which meant Daniel, her son, would remain financially tethered to her for longer. Independence was the one thing Margaret couldn't allow us to have. The story might have remained a tidy facade if not for an email I received from a reporter named Mason Grant. His subject line read, "Inquiry regarding your mother-in-law's online store." Mason was an investigative journalist known for exposing shady nonprofits and charity scams. He'd come across Margaret's shop and noticed that none of the charities listed in her Giving Back section had publicly acknowledged receiving donations. We arranged a call. Mason's voice was steady, curious, but not yet accusatory. "Do you know where she sources her items?" he asked. "Friends and family," I said carefully, "but not all with permission." He hesitated before adding, "If you can help me verify that, it could be a story, and from what I see, a big one." Later that night, I received another message, this one anonymous. "I can help you get everything back, but I want a cut." The number attached to the contact was local. My pulse quickened. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I watched Margaret's public profile grow bolder. She posted photos of herself at thrift shops, tagging them with phrases like mission-driven reselling and one woman's trash, another's treasure. The comments poured in. Praise, gratitude, even people offering to donate goods for her to process. When Mason's first draft never arrived, I reached out. His reply was curt. "I'm not pursuing this story further." A week later, he published a glowing feature on Margaret's charity shop, complete with a portrait of her surrounded by antiques. My gut told me what had happened. Margaret had bought his silence with access, charm, maybe even cash. The anonymous contact texted again. "Still interested? She's not the saint she's pretending to be." I agreed to meet in a cafe 2 towns over. The man who walked in was younger than I expected, mid-20s, with the cautious eyes of someone used to watching his back. "I'm Owen," he said, sliding into the booth. "I work for her." Or I did, until I realized what she was doing. He leaned in. "She keeps digital and paper ledgers, 2 sets. The public one has the fake charity donations. The private one tracks the real buyers and the actual prices. She's pocketing everything." Owen told me he'd been quietly photographing records, saving email threads, even recording conversations. "I was going to use it to negotiate a payout to leave quietly, but you have more to lose than I do. We could work together." I listened, wary. People who trade in secrets rarely do it for altruism. "Why me?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Because you want her stopped, and I want to get paid without getting sued." When I brought it up to Daniel, I expected him to at least hear me out. Instead, he sighed. "Claire, you've been on edge for weeks. This is my mom. She's not perfect, but she's not some criminal mastermind. Maybe you're reading too much into things." His tone was soft, patronizing, and it landed harder than any argument. He wanted peace, even if it meant I swallowed the truth. That night, I lay awake, Owen's words circling like a predator. The idea of simply reclaiming what was mine felt suddenly small. Margaret's shop wasn't just a petty theft operation, it was a brand, a network, a machine that could be dismantled or taken over. If I could control the entire channel, its customers, its suppliers, its reputation, I could turn her weapon into mine. The thought settled into me like a decision already made. Getting my belongings back would be a side effect. The real goal would be to own the ground she stood on. I started with a name, Elena Whitmore. She was my invention, a composite of a dozen real buyers I'd studied online, mid-40s, divorced, affluent, obsessed with rare collectibles. I built her a digital footprint, complete with a social media presence full of curated antiques, charity events, and discreet hints of deep pockets. Through a few well-placed messages and accidental encounters in online forums, Elena was invited into Margaret's private VIP buyers group within 2 weeks. The group was smaller than I expected, just 20 members, each with a history of high-value purchases. Margaret treated them like royalty, offering early access to her best finds before they went public. As Elena, I began buying small items, nothing that would raise suspicion, just enough to earn her trust and keep my name on the preferred client list. Meanwhile, I reached out to Thomas Hale. I expected resistance, maybe even gloating. Instead, he surprised me. "That painting," he said, his tone almost bored. "It's nice, but I only bought it to flip at auction. I didn't realize it had baggage." He paused, then added, "If returning it keeps my name out of a collector scandal, it's yours." The condition was clear. I had to make sure his name stayed clean in the tightly wound world of high-end art sales. I agreed. With the painting secured, I turned to the rest of my stolen property. I began registering copyright claims for every wedding gift and heirloom I had proof of owning. Most people don't think of registering personal items, but digital photographs, receipts, and appraisals gave me the legal foundation. Once approved, these claims gave me the power to report unauthorized sales of protected assets. The first strike was surgical. I filed takedown notices on the marketplace platform for 6 active listings tied to my property. The violation reports cited not just stolen goods, but infringement on registered works. Platforms move quickly when intellectual property is involved. It's cleaner than proving theft. Within 48 hours, Margaret's entire shop was flagged for review. On the 3rd morning, I logged in as Elena to find the group in chaos. Margaret's storefront had been suspended pending investigation. The comments were a cascade of panic. Orders delayed, items undelivered, refund requests piling up. Margaret tried to soothe them, promising it was a misunderstanding, but the trust was already leaking out of the room. The domino effect was swift. A handful of buyers began demanding refunds, citing the platform's suspension notice. Others started sharing their own suspicions about authenticity, about where the goods came from. A week earlier, they'd have defended her. Now they were turning on her, afraid of being associated with something shady. That was when I made my move. Dropping the Elena persona, I went public as myself. In a post that went viral in our local community group, I laid out the facts. The items taken without consent, the paper trail proving my ownership, the copyright registrations, and the sequence of sales. Screenshots of platform takedown notices and transaction logs left no room for interpretation. Daniel saw the post before Margaret did. He didn't speak for a long time after reading it, his face unreadable. "You're sure about all this?" he asked finally. I handed him the file Elias had prepared, emails, receipts, the bank transfers into our account labeled as household reimbursement. He read in silence, then set the papers down. She knew exactly what she was doing. When Margaret called, it wasn't to deny it. It was to plead. She said the shop was her lifeline, that without it, she'd lose her independence. I told her independence built on theft wasn't independence at all. It was a con with a polite smile. 2 days later, a courier arrived at her door with a thick envelope. The return address was from the county court. Inside was a summons, charges of commercial fraud, misrepresentation, and unlawful sale of protected assets. The investigation had escalated faster than I'd anticipated, likely pushed along by the complaints from her own VIPs once the platform shut her down. I watched from my car as she stood in the doorway, the papers trembling in her hands. It should have felt like victory. In some ways it did, but the hollow space in my chest reminded me that dismantling her world didn't rebuild mine. Still, this was the point of no return. She'd taken what was mine and used it to tighten her hold on us. Now I had the means to loosen it forever. Dios, the story spread faster than I could control. Local news outlets picked it up first, framing it as a community drama. Daughter-in-law uncovers mother-in-law's fraud. Within days, regional media followed, and then national blogs that specialized in real-life betrayals poured gasoline on the fire. My inbox filled with messages from strangers. Some congratulated me for standing up for myself. Others called me heartless for dragging family through the courts. It was surreal to watch my face appear on a morning news segment while I poured coffee in my kitchen. The anchor's voice was chipper as she debated whether my actions were empowering or vindictive. Social media fractured into camps, those who thought I was brave and those who thought I was an opportunist. Every post about me spawned dozens of comments dissecting my marriage, my career, even my expressions in the photos they found online. Then came the fallout I hadn't planned for. One of Margaret's part-time assistants, a college student who'd helped with shipping orders, lost her job when the shop closed. She posted online about how she'd relied on the income to cover tuition, and suddenly I was tagged in threads accusing me of ruining innocent lives. I donated anonymously to her GoFundMe, but it didn't matter. The narrative had already formed. At home, Daniel grew quieter. The night the court date was announced, he stood in the doorway of my office, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Claire," he said, his voice careful, "we've made our point. The shop's gone, the stuff's back. Can't we just drop it now?" I stared at him. "You're asking me to walk away from a fraud case that has our names in the bank records." He looked away. "I'm asking if keeping this going is worth tearing the rest of the family apart." The question lingered long after he left the room. While I wrestled with it, another thread began to pull loose. Emails and messages poured in from people across the state and beyond who claimed to have similar experiences with other so-called charity shops. They told stories of donated heirlooms sold without consent, of promised percentages to nonprofits that never arrived, of slick social media campaigns masking theft. Margaret, it seemed, was just one in a web of operators exploiting the same loopholes. I began mapping the connections, noting shared suppliers, identical photography styles, even overlapping customer lists. The deeper I dug, the more it became clear that this wasn't a collection of coincidences. It was a coordinated system. Then Elias called. "I've found something you need to see," he said. He sent over a spreadsheet linking bank accounts from multiple shops. The same routing number appeared across several of them, all funneling through an offshore account. At the top of the chain was a name I recognized immediately, Victor Lang. Victor had been a family friend for as long as I could remember, Daniel's godfather, a fixture at holidays, the kind of man who could slip into any conversation and leave everyone laughing. He'd invested in several of my early business ideas, never asking much in return. Seeing his name here felt like a crack running through the floor under my feet. When I confronted Elias, he only shrugged. "Margaret's not the architect. She's just a node in Victor's network. He's been laundering stolen goods through these charity shops for years." The revelation shifted everything. Margaret's actions had been deliberate, but she'd also been playing a role in someone else's production. Victor's reach meant this wasn't just a family matter anymore. It was a business with resources, lawyers, and contingencies. 2 days later, an unmarked envelope arrived at my office. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a phone number and a note in Victor's tidy handwriting. "Let's talk opportunity." Curiosity and anger wrestled in my chest as I dialed. His voice was smooth as ever. "Claire," he said warmly, "you've caused quite a stir. But I think we can help each other. You have the skills and the credibility. I have the infrastructure. Together, we could turn this into something far bigger and far more profitable than you've imagined." It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. And for a moment, just a moment, I considered what it would mean to say yes. I didn't call Victor back. Instead, I called Mason Grant, the reporter who had once backed away from the story. This time, I handed him everything: Margaret's ledgers, Owen's recordings, Elias's spreadsheets, and the offshore account trail that led straight to Victor Lang. He listened without interrupting, then said quietly, "If we run this, it won't just take down your mother-in-law. It could make your family name toxic for years." "I know," I said. My hands were steady on the table. "But the truth doesn't care about our family's comfort." For 2 weeks, we built the story brick by brick, verifying every detail twice. Mason's editor warned that publishing could mean legal retaliation, but the evidence was airtight. The night before the article dropped, I lay awake next to Daniel, staring at the ceiling. "He's your godfather," I whispered. "When this comes out, people will ask why we didn't protect him." Daniel turned to me, eyes tired but resolute. "Then we tell them the truth. We protect what's right, not what's easy." The piece hit like a hammer. Headlines called it a nationwide charity resale scam, and my name was everywhere. Margaret was a supporting player in the coverage. Victor was the star. The shock in the community was palpable. He had been a benefactor, a patron, a neighbor. Now he was the face of a laundering network disguised as goodwill. Victor called again, his voice stripped of warmth. "You've made a mistake," he said. "Doors that open for you now will slam shut later." I hung up before he could finish. An invitation came from an unexpected place, a TED conference organizer who had seen the coverage. They wanted me to speak on ethics in business, the dangers of blind trust, and how personal boundaries intersect with commerce. I hesitated. It would mean turning my private pain into a public brand. But I realized that if I didn't shape the story, someone else would. On stage, under the red circle of light, I told the truth. Not just about Margaret or Victor, but about the culture that lets people wrap theft in the language of charity. I spoke about the importance of documentation, of asking hard questions even when they make dinner uncomfortable, of how silence can be the most dangerous currency. I was offered a seat at the table, I told the audience, a seat built from stolen wood. I walked away, not because I didn't like the view, but because I didn't want to be part of the structure. The applause was immediate, but what stunned me was what came next. The talk went online, and within a week it had been viewed over 1 million times. My inbox flooded again, but this time with stories from people who had been afraid to speak, who now had the language to explain what happened to them. In response to the public outcry, the largest e-commerce platforms announced the creation of a dedicated task force to investigate virtual charity sellers. They invited me to consult on the project, not as a victim, but as an expert. Daniel and I launched our own company, a design and consulting firm with full financial transparency. Every client could see where their money went, down to the last cent. It became part of our brand. No hidden doors, no locked drawers. The settlement from the case funded something I hadn't dared imagine before. The Madison Foundation, a grant and legal support network for people exploited by family members in business matters. The irony wasn't lost on me. My most public wound had become the seed for something protective and lasting. Months later, as I sat in my office drafting a proposal for the foundation's next outreach program, a new email appeared in my inbox. The subject line was simple: "Need advice about my mother-in-law." I clicked it open. The first line read, "I think she's selling my inheritance online." I leaned back in my chair, the weight of recognition pressing on me. This was not the end of the story. It was the start of someone else's,